Hi, everyone. For those of you who are just joining in, we will start at 3 p.m. sharp. In the meantime, do take some time out to fill out the poll, and we will start in 3 minutes exactly. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We will be starting in a minute. Please do take a time out to take the poll. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Urbanlogue 4.0. My name is Kashmira Tabaj, and I'm a senior manager at ITDP India, and I will be your host this afternoon. Now, Urbanlogue is a continuing legacy of sharing knowledge and thought-provoking sustainable mobility solutions since 2019. And this time, we're coming to you with bold new themes, fresh ideas, authentic conversations with enriched perspectives. Now, with a stellar lineup of speakers who we have been leading urban transformation and sustainable mobility efforts across India's cities. ITDP, in association with the International Council on Clean Transportation, ICCT, are kickstarting a two-part webinar series on low emission zones, also known as LEZs. Now, LEZs are more than just about clean air. They are about creating healthy, vibrant, and sustainable communities. In fact, they have been redefining what it means to live in a truly smart, modern, and a forward thinking society. But as more cities around the world are adopting these zones, it's opening up a lot more questions than expected. Are LEZs actually successful? Can they be implemented in Indian cities? If yes, how so? And how are these cities even thinking about implementing? What are the strategies? What are the challenges that they may face? Now, to answer all these questions, let's hear from our experts and get those answers today. Now, we have an extremely exciting lineup of speakers for you. They are experts, city leaders who have deep dived into the space of LEC and have taken up the challenge to make it a reality for their cities. Now, today's webinar brings together their insights, the learnings from their experience over the years. Now, before we dive into the agenda and the speakers for the day, I would like to highlight some housekeeping rules. Number one, participants and panelists, please feel free to chat, interact with one another in the chat box throughout the session. But please make sure that you address your chat to all participants so that everyone can read what you have to share. And number two, please type your question in the Q&A box. Our team will then shortlist these questions for the Q&A session after the panel discussion. Now, with that said, let's dive into the agenda for the day. And first, we will have a quick context-setting presentation on the work done so far in the cities of for Urban Development at ITDP India, researcher at ICCT India. This will then be followed by a presentation by our keynote speaker, Anumita Roy Chaudhary, Executive Director at the Center for Science and Environment. And her presentation is on Delhi's experience of reducing vehicle emissions and to understand what the citizens had to say about it. After that, we will have a very insightful, in-depth conversation with our esteemed panelist, Mr. Shekhar Singh, IAS, Pimpri-Chinchwad Municipal Commissioner, Mr. G. Shrikant, IAS, Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar Municipal Commissioner, and Anumita Roy Chaudhary. This session will be moderated by Ashwati Dilip, Managing Director at ITDP India. After the panel discussion, we will open up the floor for your questions so that you get to interact with our experts. So without further delay, I would like to invite Siddhartha and Vaibhav to set the context on low emission zones in India and share some details from their work that they've been focusing on these cities over the years. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you, Kashmira, and I hope I'm audible. A very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Vaibhav Kush. I'm a researcher with the International Council on Clean Transportation. Let me start by reiterating what Kashmira said, that low emission zones are not just about cleaner air, but also making our communities healthier and more sustainable. So the intention of low emission zones is not limited to only reducing emissions or improving air quality, but it is also about creating a broader and positive impact on public health. Now, how do we do that? And the answer is very straightforward. We need to look at things in a holistic manner. Most of us would know about the avoid, shift, improve approach of planning sustainable transportation systems, where avoid basically means to plan our cities, design our cities in a way that vehicular trips are reduced or unavoidable trips are eliminated. Shift is basically we are trying to encourage a modal shift towards cleaner alternatives, mass transit, non-motorized transport, walking, etc. And then we have improve, where whatever the transportation systems are there, we try to improve them in terms of fuel, in terms of efficiency, and so on. It is pretty much the same case in low emission zones. We are drawing learnings from the ASI framework of sustainable transport planning in low emission zones. How do we reduce road transport pollution? We improve the technology. Basically, we shift to cleaner vehicles. We encourage a mode shift, public transport, walking, cycling, and we restrict the usage of polluting vehicles in the cities. That is the only way we can reduce the emissions that we are having from the transport sector. Next. So now low emission zones, what are low emission zones? Low emission zone is a geographically defined area where the movement of highly polluting vehicles is restricted or regulated in parts or across the entire city. Now, this is a very, as of today, this is a very common concept in European cities. There are over 320 low emission zones in Europe, and they have been quite successful. If you see on the left, you'll see that in London there has been a reduction in PM10 by 13%, a reduction in nitrogen dioxide by 18.4%, and PM particulate matter and nitrogen oxides are basically primarily emitted by the transport sector. So there has been a reduction in emissions due to these interventions, and there has been an increase in the overall quality of life, in the overall public health of the citizens due to these interventions. Now, there are two types of low emission zones. Usually, these are the two types that have been implemented in European cities. One is a priced low emission zone. The other is a non-priced low emission zone. Non-priced basically is more self-regulating. I would say that you have identified certain polluting vehicle categories, and you have restricted their or regulated the movement of these vehicles, and they are being self-regulated. In the priced low emission zones, basically you are allowed to enter, but you have to pay a hefty fine for entering into these zones. So that becomes the priced low emission zone. Next. Now, as I was saying, in the avoid, shift, improve framework, depending on the urban intervention, we will have different focus on either on avoid or on shift or on improve. Similarly, here in low emission zones, our focus is on restricting the usage of polluting vehicles, but this intervention has to be complemented through measures which include improving our public transport systems, improving our walking and cycling network, our NMT network basically, and avoiding thorough traffic in local streets. So basically, idea being that we cannot restrict the people's mobility. We need to provide them with alternative mobility. And these are not the only complementary measures when we are promoting, when we are shifting to cleaner modes of transport, we'll have to provide infrastructure like charging infrastructure. Siddharth, if you could go next. There are other ways of complementing low emission zones. So parking management, scrappage of old polluting vehicles, incentivizing this shift, and so on. So this is the broad intent behind the low emission zones, and this is the broad scope of a low emission zone. Now, traditionally in India, we have not, in India so far, we have not seen low emission zones in the traditional sense, like we have in the European cities. But we do have certain interventions. Delhi, for example, has this environmental compensation charge for trucks entering into the city. Pune also restricts heavy entry of heavy vehicles in the city. Cities like Agra, Mathiran, Kevadia have implemented similar restrictions on certain categories of vehicles in the name of environment, in the name of reducing congestion. But the way we define, or the way we have seen low emission zones being adopted, implemented, enforced in European cities, I don't think we have seen that kind of a zone or a city looking at creating low emission zones in that holistic sense yet. And I think that was the intent early last year when ITDP and ICCT joined hands to to support three cities in developing a roadmap towards implementing or enabling a low emission zone. So next, how we started was first understanding where our cities are in respect to emissions. So we took data from various sources, including the state pollution control boards, CPCB, reports from IITM, etc., all secondary sources. And we realized that particulate matter, PM 2.5 and PM 10, both exceed the permissible limits set by NAAQS. NOx and CO are within the limits, but they're still, I would say, high. Next. And this is, we also took this PM 2.5 concentration levels from Washington University. It's an open source data on global air pollution. And we realized that, the concentration of these emissions within the city at certain places within the city are quite high, which in a way indicates that, there can be zones in the city where you can prioritize the implementation of a low emission zone. Next. We also studied emission inventories developed by the cities. And for Pune, for example, SAFAR has created the report. And this is an example of Pune, where we see that in the emission inventory, it has been deduced that most of the emissions that are being that are there in the city are coming from the road transport sector. 46% of all emissions in Pune were coming from the road transport sector. And within that, if you see NOx, for example, 73% of NOx in the city is coming from road transport. 46% of PM 2.5 is coming from road transport. So basically indicating that road transport is one of the biggest contributors to deteriorating air quality in these cities, and definitely something that we can look into address through low emission zones. Next. So once we had this baseline understanding of how much emissions are there, what's the air quality and all, we did a primary survey with each of the three cities. So we were supporting Pune Municipal Corporation, Pimpri-Chinchwad, and Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar. In each of the three cities, we did a primary survey with over 4,000 vehicles. This was a fuel station survey where we had surveyors at the fuel station having interacting with the vehicle drivers that are coming to for refueling, and trying to understand things like the age of the vehicle, what is the emission standard that the vehicle follows, etc., to be able to establish two things. One, what is the vehicular profile of a city? Every city will have a very different vehicular characteristic. Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar has a slightly different characteristic than Pune, for example. Mumbai would have a entirely different vehicular characteristic. So one is to understand what is the fleet characteristics, but also to estimate what is actually coming out of these vehicles. How much emission is being generated from the movement of these vehicles. And these were the categories that we had surveyed. Next. So if we see, this is again, I think for Pune, we have taken the case study. We have similar graphs for other two cities as well. But if we look at this, we see that only 5% of light motor vehicles and two-wheelers, etc., are older than 15 years. The age of the vehicle, the fleet basically in the city is slightly newer. Yet and this is quite interesting, that even though our the vehicular fleet in the city is slightly newer, it is still contributing to 46% of emissions. Next. Now, close to 70% of vehicles in Pimpri-Chinchwad were pre-BS6, basically BS5, BS4 and below, sorry. So now, as we all know, that as the emission standard becomes more stringent, the tailpipe emissions are likely to be lesser. But uh, with only 30% of BS6 vehicles, and BS6 vehicles are at this point of time, it's the highest emission standard that we have. Most of the vehicles that are running in the cities are polluting, so to say. Next. And then we have the vehicle kilometers. How much is on a daily average, how much are these different type of vehicles traveling in the city? And we see that commercial vehicles, primarily heavy passenger vehicles and light passenger vehicles, both commercial, they have the highest vehicle kilometers in the city. And these numbers were pretty much similar across all the three cities. Yeah, next. So based on these parameters that we studied, we calculated the emission inventory for each of the three cities, and we realized that goods vehicle, two-wheelers, light motor vehicles are contributing more than 85% of the total emissions in the road from the road sector. So if you see the red, 35% of CO2, 35% of particulate matter, 49% of NO2. The blues basically is the yeah. Sorry. Okay, next.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Weber, for giving a great start and by explaining low emission zones and dwelling a bit deep into our analysis about transport emissions. I would now like to take you all on how cities can start planning spatially and on policy plan level to kickstart low emission zones by taking an example of, say, the Pimpri-Chinchwad city that we are working with. In order to understand where can low emission zones be implemented, we divided the city into grids of around 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers each. And we analyzed these grids through various lenses, like the availability of good public transport, walk cycle infrastructure, charging infrastructure, presence of vulnerable land uses like schools, hospitals, gardens, and open areas to gauge the readiness and priority of implementing area level low emission zones. By doing this exercise, we zeroed in on an area of around 30 square kilometers in the middle of the city to implement low emission zones on an area level, which can start by restricting vehicles which are pre-BS6, because as Weber said, BS6 is the highest and more stringent norms and the cleaner technology that is available today. And also by improving complementary measures like your public transport, NMT, that is your walk-in cycle infrastructure, charging infrastructure to boost EV use, etc. The low emission zones can then be expanded phase-wise to ultimately declaring the whole city as a low emission zone. We have proposed a 2-year preparatory period for the city to implement low emission zones. So, for example, if low emission zones is declared in 2024, the city will have around 2 years to work on and figure out complementary policies, plans, and projects like the scrappage policy, walk cycle plans, augmenting public transport, infrastructure, and charging infrastructure, along with also streamlining policies like the scrappage policy. These 2 years can also be used for community engagement, bringing the citizens and other stakeholders on board, installing monitoring mechanisms for air quality, and finalizing enforcement mechanisms to implement low emission zones in the long run. So ideally, by the end of these 2 years, cities can ban pre-BS6 vehicles in the priority area. By 2032, pre-BS6 vehicles are banned in the whole city, while allowing only zero emission modes in the priority area 1. And in the long run, by 2040, all city can be zero emission. We also worked out the impact of implementing low emission zones in 3 scenarios: business as usual, which is maroon; if all polluting vehicles get converted to the latest ICE technology, which is blue; and if all polluting vehicles adopt zero emission technology, which is green. Ideally, in BAU scenario, the PM 2.5 emission load will go down by 50% by 2030 due to adoption of newer engine technologies, but this is a very slow process. An instant reduction of around 91% can be achieved in 2026 if low emission zones is implemented. Similar decrease in CO levels can also be seen through LEMZ implementation. Currently, we are working with cities to create detailed strategy plans, research and finalize the IT enforcement options available, figuring out the legal aspects and action points for different stakeholders, and finally understanding the right institutional setup required to make low emission zones a success in the long run. Thank you so much. Over to you, Kashmira.
Thank you very much, Vaibhav and Siddhartha. And thank you so much for sharing a very detailed methodology of the data collection process for the 3 cities that ITDP and ICCT have worked with. And I think it comes by no surprise that road transport is one of the biggest contributors of carbon emissions. But a very interesting point that Vaibhav also made is that to make it conducive for people to move to, because you'll be restricting polluting vehicles, but for people to be able to move from polluting vehicles to cleaner modes, cities must create a conducive environment by improving their walking, cycling, public transport, managing parking better. And it was interesting to see what some of the thanks, Weber, for sharing what some of the European cities have been doing. But it was great to see what cities like Mathiran and Delhi have been doing as well. So on that note, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Anumita Roy Chaudhary, Executive Director for Center for Science and Environment, to share her presentation on Delhi's experience of reducing vehicle emissions and what the public had to say about it. Over to you, Anumita.
Thank you so much, Kashmira. And it's absolutely a delight to be here. And it was great to hear Vaibhav and Siddharth and all of you, because you have already kind of given the context and the approach and the scope of the new generation interventions that we are now contemplating in our cities. So what I'll do, I'll share with you our so how have we been looking at this whole issue, and at the same time to try and figure out what needs to be the pathways to take this concept forward. So when you look at the images like this, essentially everything that we are talking about today is to find solution to this mobility crisis. But when we say this, for a long time, we have been trying to address this in very fragmented manner, in a way that we will talk about improving public transport, or we will talk about scaling up walking and cycling infrastructure. Another area will be to look at electrification, improving vehicle technology. So all these, and the fleet renewal, now all these strategies are absolutely critical to build the big solution. But somehow, lots happening in each of these fields, but it's all not adding up. And that has kind of led to this new way of looking at things. And the way I would like to conceptualize this is this: now we are actually saying that let's take an area-based approach to all these interventions, and for the air pollution and carbon mitigation. What is very interesting, that the municipalities today in our cities who already have the responsibility of implementing their clean air action plans, and there's a funding available for it, as part of that implementation strategy, they have already taken what they call is a hotspot approach. And local hotspot area-based clean air plan is one of the mandatory requirements of the municipalities. Now, when you say hotspot and area approach, that means you are trying to address range of pollution sources in that area, which is good. But when we looked at this in more deeply, we realized that the hotspot approach is working for other sources of pollution. So therefore, for waste burning, for dust control, for construction dust, that helps. But somehow that approach is not working for mobility and transportation solution. Now, therefore, what is it that we need to do more over and above that? And how do we really join the dots so that all the strategies that Vaibhav and Siddhartha talked about can become a reality? But interesting again, that all policymakers, what they really need to keep in mind, that this area-based approach to planning and interventions have already started to take shape in India. And today they are differently known as either transit-oriented development or parking management area plans, or as we are talking about LEZ, low emission zone, right? Now they're all area-based approaches, but they are trying to address it in a way that in a given area, you are trying to scale up options for sustainable mobility. And additionally, what PMAP is doing is also looking at how to restrain the demand for travel and parking. And LEZ now is coming in, and that is the new reinvention, and that's something that we did want to understand. So, and when I look at it, I always like to point out that when you take the area-based approach, let us understand the power of change that it represents. Just to give an example for Delhi, we always like to cite this data that now after the completion of the entire metro line in Delhi, about 80% of Delhiites are within 400 meters of some metro station. Now, therefore, in that TOD zone, if we can intensify the connectivity approaches, walking, cycling infrastructure, and then add the layer of bringing in cleaner vehicles and electric vehicles, then understand the spin-off that is possible. And similarly, when you look at the PMAP model, the parking management area plan, and I know that Pune is also working with those instruments. Now that again, just understand that how we are moving from spot fixing for parking to area-based parking management. So where you are taking an entire neighborhood or a municipal ward to come up with a PMAP, which is looking not only at how to provide legal and well-organized parking, but is also organizing all kinds of street activities to reorganize the space for more efficient and sustainable usage and address all road users. Now that is also happening, as you can see in Delhi. These are the real examples that wherever we have taken that area approach and implemented a parking management area plan, just look at the before and after effect of that intervention, how that is kind of neatening up the whole neighborhood. And that's the way we want to move forward. And then from there is the next level, which is all that the focus of the discussion today, that is the low emission zone, which is building on the concept of TOD, of PMAP, and some more. And this is an example from Bhubaneswar, where they have already identified the PMAP area around the Lingaraj temple. It's quite a big area. And there they are looking at very comprehensively that how to bring in mobility solutions along with other pollution control measures. Now, keeping this as there for the context, now let me just do a little bit of deep dive to share with you some emerging lessons from the work that we've done in Delhi. So this convergence of area that we are talking about clearly, as I said earlier, we are looking at how to accelerate the transition to clean and zero emission vehicles in an area. scale up integrated public transport with walking and cycling, and the restraint measures or demand management measure. Now, so therefore, to understand that how LEZ model can deliver on this, we have done the investigation in Delhi, and it is quite hypothetical at this stage because LEZ has not yet been implemented in Delhi. But it is important to understand that through the LEZ model, we are trying to influence the choices and the commuting choices of the people and their behavior. Therefore, people are central to this transition, and therefore it is very important that we talk to them and understand and get their perception that if a certain model of LEZ gets implemented, then how are they going to respond, adjust, and then adopt the solution? So what we did, we have looked at two different scenarios that are possible of LEZ implementation. One is the very classical, ambitious scenario where you just want to say that we don't want you to bring in any other vehicle other than BS6 or electric vehicle, right, to the designated area. So it's a complete ban concept. And then if you do, then there is going to be a heavy penalty on defaulters. So that is the ambitious and a very stringent scenario that you are looking at. But then you also have a moderate scenario where you're saying, okay, fine, I'm not really going to stop you from coming. But if you're bringing in dirty vehicles, then you have to pay an access charge. And that entry fee can also be lower than the heavy penalty that you can contemplate in the scenario one. So keeping these two scenarios of LEZ implementation in Delhi, we therefore did a little bit of a deep dive. And all of you know the New Delhi Municipal Corporation area, which also includes the Lutein Delhi. This is the most central part of Delhi. And so we said, okay, let's look at this zone and try and understand. So our first effort was to understand that what is the overall service level of that from the mobility perspective. So you actually find that this area, because 35% of this area is actually under road network. It's a huge share. I mean, road network is enormous if you say it's 35%. And then we looked at the available footpath. The whole assumption is the moment you begin to put restraint, your demand for walking, cycling, and usage of public transport is going to increase, and therefore the region should have a holding area. Now, when we looked at, so you do have footpaths, but of course it's not 100% road network that has proper footpath, and therefore the width of the footpath also varies. So we looked at those characteristics. But very interesting, that about 62% of this area of NDMC is within 400 meters of the transit nodes, the metro line. Okay, so therefore you can see clearly that it also has the advantage of public transport access. So keeping this in mind, then we said, okay, now let's have a conversation with the people who are going to get affected by if we implement LEZ. So we said, okay, let's find out from them how do they travel, where do they come from, the trip purpose, frequency of their trip, etc., and vehicle ownership patterns. Also look at their socioeconomic profile, also their psychological factors, that how are they going to respond when we are going to present to them that what are the possible scenarios of LEZ implementation and the restrictions that are going to get imposed. And to get the whole perception, therefore, and also because the ultimate objective of this is also to push them to public transport, it is important to know from them what do they think about the quality and the availability of public transport in that area. So keeping that in mind, we talked to, through a survey method, a wide spectrum of stakeholders, the vehicle operators in each and every vehicle category, and also users of IPT and public transport. So whole spectrum that we talked to. And there's age profile and income profile of that, so the people that we have talked to. So while doing this, we said the whole purpose was to find out this and find these critical answers. One critical answer was, suppose we implement, then how will this influence the vehicle owners and operators, will they move to cleaner vehicles? Okay, or how much will they opt for electrification? And then to what extent they will prefer to shift to sustainable modes. And then, which is very important because it impacts people directly, to understand that how different income groups are going to get impacted by the change. It's very interesting when we talk to them that how the responses came. So when we looked at the two-wheeler, and especially, so there were two categories: the daily commuters and those who go for recreation, the secondary trip users. And here, what we could find is that especially if you come here, that around majority of the two-wheelers are saying when they were confronted with a complete ban option, they actually opted for moving to buying a new two-wheeler. Okay, and so one would actually think that the two-wheelers who themselves who are not perhaps a very high income category. So, but then the majority are opting to buy new two-wheelers, and not only that, you will see that the share of both of course, BS6 two-wheeler and the electric two-wheeler, both are pretty high, which also brings out that if we had the right design, then we can also see quite a massive electrification of the two-wheeler segment through this approach. Now, you may wonder why would two-wheelers, so many would want to buy a new one. This, I think, in many ways kind of confirms one fact that we have always known, that, and if you look at specifically into this, actually the lower income
I'm so
groups
sorry.
have actually opted for purchasing. Well, more of them have opted for purchasing new vehicle, which almost sounds contradictory. But then we know that in India, running a two-wheeler, the operational cost of two-wheeler is cheaper than the minimum bus fare, the per kilometer cost. And therefore, for a two-wheeler, the price-sensitive market, even if you push them, they will stick to the two-wheeler, but they will also opt for electric two-wheelers because that is even cheaper to operate. And therefore, a good policy design can certainly help. And but what is very important also, that about 45% of them have also said they would prefer to move to public transport if the second option of putting an access charge is brought in, right? So this is, and then there is always an inelastic group who say that they will not change. So that's one big category. But it was very clear from the price. Yes, I'll just do very quickly now. So the price sensitivity perspective, that about that year, so we can figure out at what number they will begin to shift. So almost a similar scenario for private car owners. And here, but in the car segment, we are finding that the inelasticity and their willingness that they want to stick to the car more instead of making the big changes. And so the shift to the public transport is not going to be as big as you would want to see, but they would opt for new cars. And so similarly with autos and then with the goods service providers, in their case, what is very interesting is that especially heavy-duty vehicles, they said that they were very inelastic, very rigid in their approach. They said if there is a ban, then we are simply going to shift the focus of our operations, right? But whereas the smaller, low, and the medium group, they opted more for saying that, no, we will buy a new vehicle. So now to come into some last few conclusion remarks that I just want to make, that all that you heard from the people in Delhi about how they will respond to the if those LEZ scenarios are brought in, that has to be understood along with their perception of their alternatives. And this is what is worrying, that you may think of LEZ and all the restrictions, but then when you look at them, that the majority of them say that the state of public transport and the way they have ranked and they have pointed out the problems with it in terms of accessibility, overcrowding, safety concerns, inadequate frequency, these are big concerns for them. Now, therefore, if there is always the caveat that if those things change, then they will be able to shift to public transport, but that is a very big conditionality. And keep in mind that in Delhi today, less than 1% of bus stops have less than 10 minutes waiting time. Majority have much more than that. So clearly, therefore, what you are looking at, so their perception of switching to public transport or to buying electric vehicles, like they are all bringing out the challenges that they face currently in terms of the range anxiety, poor maintenance of charging infrastructure, inadequate charging infrastructure. All these are the larger conditions that will have to be fulfilled if we are to be pushing for an LEZ approach. So the final takeaway to summarize is that while LEZ is going to be a very effective enabler to connect the policies and to bring a change on the ground, but then it is absolutely essential to keep in mind that the harsher restrictions will work only if the other conditions are fulfilled. And for many people, the use of personal vehicle has become very inelastic, mainly because of the lack of option. So therefore, for any city to, while moving towards LEZ, they need to have a phase-in plan. So you need to introduce first the other approaches like your PMAP, variable parking pricing, pedestrianization, regulate entry-based charges, eliminate end-of-life vehicles, do fleet renewal. So with all these small steps, then you move towards the more restrictive approaches to the final point. So therefore, it is therefore what is important that the municipalities now need to consider that to have a roadmap for implementation. But even more important is that they have to also leverage all the revenue heads that are possible from transit-oriented development policy, from parking interventions, and then develop a local area fund to implement or improve the overall service level of the targeted zone. So that's the final point that we just want to make, that therefore the reimagination of the city and to implement and to get the huge change that we are looking for requires an area-based approach, which is going to tie up all the existing strategies that we have for electrification, for fleet renewal, integrated public transport, walking, cycling, and vehicle restraint measures, all need to be brought in the same planning process, but for the targeted ward of the municipality that we are looking at. So that's what we are finally, we found, and that's the kind of response that we got from the people to enable its implementation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anumita, for sharing the details of your study from Delhi. I think it really highlights the importance of involving the citizens, understanding their concerns, and getting their buy-in for something like an LEZ zone, which at a later stage may receive a lot of pushback. Thank you so much for sharing a very interesting study. Without any further delays, I would like to invite Ashwati Dilip to moderate our next session. It's a panel discussion with some of the champions of LEZ work in India. I would like to welcome Mr. Shekhar Singh, Pimpri-Chinchwad Municipal Commissioner, Mr. G. Shrikant, Municipal Commissioner of Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar, along with Anumita. Over to you, Ashwati. And sorry, before you take over, Ashwati, may I please request all the panelists to keep their answers short, brief, and crisp. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kashmira. I hope you can hear me. And firstly, thank you to our presenters. So thank you, Anumita, for your sort of deep research on the impacts of LEZ on the different sections of our society and the need to really provide better transport options as we look at exploring low emission zones. And also thanks to Vaibhav and Siddharth for your presentation on what are LEZs, how can LEZs be an important tool to reduce emissions, etc. At this point, I would really like to express my gratitude to both Pimpri-Chinchwad and Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar for giving ITDP and ICCT the opportunity to create a starting point for these cities and work with the cities on creating a roadmap to implementing LEZs. So at this juncture, I'd like to respectfully invite the municipal commissioners of Pimpri-Chinchwad and Aurangabad to hear your thoughts on how can we go about with implementing low emission zones. So I'd really like to start with the very first question that Kashmira asked. Is it time for Indian cities to take these proactive steps to tackle transport emissions? And here I'd like to share about a article that I'd read on Guardian just a few days before, where there was a really good linkage between air pollution and health. And the latest evidence that they were sharing was that the effects of air pollution and health damage from air pollution is accumulating over a lifetime. Of course, cancer from air pollution was the obvious example that was stated, but it was also highlighting how air pollution was hampering our children's physical and cognitive development, and also chronic diseases in later years, such as osteoporosis, dementia, etc. So here, I'd really like to come to you, to you, Shekhar Singh, sir, to first start with your thoughts. So Pimpri-Chinchwad has been taking on, a lot of activities, whether it's about improving walking or improving public transportation, etc. But how do you see this piece of discouraging the use of polluting vehicles fitting in your overall puzzle of prioritizing your citizens' well-being? What are your thoughts about this?
Hi, Ashwati. Thanks for inviting me today. I hope my voice is clear. I'm traveling.
Yes.
So sorry for the entire video being a little fuzzy. I think I totally agree with what just Ms. Chaudhary said about, the enablers that are required to be present. The way that we've progressed as a journey, it's been a collaborative journey along with ITDP. It's been going on for some time now. In terms of making the building blocks available, in terms of deciding which could be the areas where we can even begin to think about LEZ. And it's been some time. I won't go into it. I think a lot of it was also shared in the presentation also by Ms. Chaudhary as well, in terms of what it might entail. But a lot of deep thought has gone into deciding and finalizing an area where we can begin to think about in terms of LEZ. In India, it can be very, very tricky because of the entire, the public view with regards to how we can control the movement of vehicles, etc. Some practical difficulties of providing an alternate route available, etc. But I think the transition phase, and that's what we've been discussing as a team as well internally, that I think that is going to be very, very critical for us when we look at the transition phase when we are implementing this. So what we are doing in PCMC is we are trying to link it with a graded response action plan that we are coming out with. It's almost there. We've had multiple stakeholder consultations with it. And we decided that to begin with, before we move on to the entire LEZ regime starting sometime in 26-27, we need to probably make a head start with regards to few restrictions that we might impose with regards to the AQI and air quality index through a GRAP module, through a GRAP framework. And through the GRAP framework, we decided that, okay, that also gives a chance for people to understand that if the AQI is above a certain limit, that there is also a shared responsibility. It's not just the municipal corporation who's responsible, right? It's me as an individual user of a private vehicle. It's me as an individual industry owner. It's me as an individual, maybe a dhaba owner who's using still using a coal this thing fired in the bakeries. So it's all a shared responsibility, which we thought through GRAP, which we'll be able to sort of project to the people in general, and probably in 2 to 3 years' time, move on to the LEZ regime. Just one final thought is also with regards to the technology that should be used. That also provides some challenges in terms of how we use the technology to control the access. Now, we've been discussing about multiple things. PCMC has been dabbling with the NPR for quite some time now, especially from a traffic regulation perspective. But but it's still an open discussion, to be very frank, as to what's the technology that I should be using as an entry barrier into that area.
Thank you so much, Shekhar Singh, sir. And like really, congratulations to you to take this progressive step of introducing low emission zones through GRAP and sort of looking at this shared responsibility between the multiple stakeholders. Coming to you, sir, with respect, just as we are looking at Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar, Srikanth, sir, what are your thoughts? How do you think that low emission zones could be a tool for a city like Aurangabad? And also, sir, when you look at multiple cities in India, many of our cities are not like Mumbai or Pune or Chennai or Bangalore. We're looking at even smaller cities. So, the approach that, for example, you might take might be something that many other cities can also sort of learn from. So what are your thoughts of what might be the challenges that you might face? And how do you think, what are some of the opportunities that you can actually leverage for testing a progressive tool like this? Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you, everyone, and especially like when you said like we are a million plus city, and like smaller cities than us, bigger cities like Pune and Mumbai, and Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar is a 17 lakh population city, wherein we are fast growing industrial city now, and this is the right time wherein we have to implement LEZs, and through this, we can welcome the investment across the world, this space where we have this kind of zones because uh, our city is surrounded by all industrial zones like on east, west, north. Only south is the only area which is left out. But the major challenge is to implement because as of now we have received this policy, but we are working with the inter departments to encourage and accept because what I believe might be right, but what I can implement with effective coordination with all other stakeholders is very much important because cities like these, which are not bigger cities or not a smaller cities, is very difficult to convince because the challenge will be how we can convince the people to implement LEZs. And smaller cities can use different schemes of the government like National Clean Air Program and smart streets policies and different policies we can effectively integrate and then we can implement LEZs even in the smaller cities also. But like what we are doing is that upgrading our fleets to for e-vehicles. Though we have launched a tender for setting up e-chargers, but there was not much response because people didn't see the market because this market is fast growing and we have to provide the gap funding and very recently we talked with different partners and then we are going to put charging stations by corporation at different places so that because I was uh, observing the presentation by Ms. Chaudhary, where she was saying that how the two-wheeler person will shift to electric vehicle or to public transport, because it's all about the reliability of our public transport, which we are done by effectively using the technology. Because technology is one tool wherein by effectively using it, uh, we can definitely work towards low emission zones. Like we are procuring new vehicles through PME Bus Seva, where it's electric buses which central government is sponsoring, and by encouraging by providing the tax incentives for the people who are using, like in our city we are providing a tax incentive up to 10% for the persons who own a electric vehicle. There is a combination of different factors like 7-star property scheme is there wherein 1 star we have given it for the people who are using the e-vehicle or uses public transport system. So in a way, the small cities can take up these low emission zones because they have to fastly catch up because the low emission zones is going to be a luxury for the people, and in future these are the zones people are moving out from the high emitting zones to low emitting zones, where even the builders are advertising the pristine nature, clean air. These are the going to be the luxury points for tomorrow. So definitely, by involving all the stakeholders, these can be picked up, and we are in the process of establishing a climate action cell. And through this cell, we will be coordinating with different agencies. We will. The challenge is that convincing them that how much it is important, because many people for many people these air quality indices and doesn't matter much, but by putting them restrictions on the usages will definitely, because there is someone who has to take the leadership, and in cities the corporations can take a lead to implement this, and then once we effectively implement and effectively follow the policies, definitely the low emitting zones can be a great success.
Thank you so much, Srikanth sir. The way you had spoken about the fact that as our cities grow, and as our small cities probably grow even faster than our bigger cities, like low emissions zones can be a really important tool for them to sort of leap ahead and not necessarily make the mistakes that our larger cities are making. Maybe here, one thing, sir, that you had also mentioned is that when you're doing these restrictions, there are going to be people who are going to push back. And Anumita, you all have been at the forefront of also bringing in ECC on the polluting trucks in Delhi. So can you share with us, when you all went through this journey of sort of restricting or putting these charges, what actually transpired? What were the kind of challenges that you faced? How did you address them, and how was that journey?
So, right, Ashwati, so that was a fascinating journey. So, what had happened was that trucks coming inside Delhi was a huge problem, not only in terms of congestion, but their contribution to Delhi's pollution from vehicular sources were more than 40%. And it's a huge pollution source. And we had to figure out what to do. And for a long time, Supreme Court was trying to address it by asking the government to create some bypass roads around Delhi so that the trucks take those roads and don't enter Delhi. But even after construction of the bypasses, what noted that where they actually had options, even then the trucks were entering Delhi. And we couldn't fathom why. So what we did, we organized a survey at the key entry points of Delhi and counted the number of trucks coming in. But while doing that, we found that it's not only that the numbers are big, but the trucks were finding it cheaper to go through Delhi than take the toll roads around Delhi. So the toll charges were higher than the municipal charges of entering Delhi, right? So when we shared all this data, because we were then in that, the Supreme Court was hearing that case, and when the court saw the data, they said that you have to bring in the polluter pay principle and make it more expensive for the trucks to go through Delhi. And that was the genesis of imposing environment compensation charge. So today, each and every truck that enters Delhi has to pay that compensation charge on a daily basis. And the court additionally said that just don't fritter away that money, take that revenue and create a dedicated fund, which will be available only for pollution control in Delhi. So now what has happened is to implement that process, because manual collection of charges takes a lot of leakages. So then additionally, the court said you also implement the RFID system, camera-based monitoring, so that you collect the fee properly. And now they have created the funds, and it's a huge amount that runs into crores and thousands of crores that is available to Delhi government now for other pollution control measures. And this money today is being utilized for giving subsidy for electric vehicles.
Thank you so much, Anumita. So that's a really inspiring story for many of us to learn from. And maybe, I'd like to come back to the commissioners at this point, because both of you spoke about the cities actually being industrial cities to start with as well. And so Shekhar Singh, you had mentioned about bringing in these charges. And sometimes we're always thinking about, should it be a ban or should it be pricing? So could you maybe share with our larger audience, because while we might have had multiple of these discussions, it'll be great to hear from you as to how did you decide whether it should be priced or whether it should be an outright ban. But in PCMC's case, we've gone with the priced model. And also to sort of, maybe think about what are you thinking as actions that you would take to provide your citizens with other choices. So maybe even highlighting a little bit about the work that PCMC is doing to make sure that there are other options that the cities can do. If you could just maybe highlight some of those.
Ashwati, I think banning, to my mind, will not be a very practical solution, at least not in our local Indian context, not in PCMC's context for sure. Because as Ms. Anumita was also saying, ideally speaking, if I'm banning a private vehicle from being used, and a lot of times it is increasingly becoming an inelastic sort of a demand, right? Where I'm not ready to leave my vehicle and move to a public transport, not necessarily not always because I don't want to, but also because there are a few issues with the way the public transport is available, the certainty of the public transport, and other issues attached to the public transport. So definitely, I think to that extent, choice was at least always in what we've discussed was always in terms of the pricing mechanism. It is also needless to say inherently linked to the policy that the government of India has also come out with in terms of the scrapping of the vehicles, etc., etc. That is also very, very closely linked to this entire thing. But one also has to be mindful of the fact that an older vehicle is also a reflection of the economic cross section which is able to afford those vehicles, because there is a large second-hand market in India, and one can't brush away that reality in terms of how it portrays in terms of how the economic cross section is divided with regards to the ownership of the vehicle. Having said so, I think in terms of providing alternatives, there are few alternatives. For example, increasingly we have been now talking about increasing the number of buses, which are infamously low in Pune yet. But I think we are moving towards a consensus and trying to see how those numbers can increase. Right now, currently from about 2,300 to at least 3,500. That is at least the bare minimum that Pune and PCMC both as a city need the number of buses. And that also becomes critical when you understand various parameters like 97% of the people have a bus stand within 500 meters of their homes. So that is one public transport that we need to make available for people once we switch on to this. And I completely agree with Ms. Anumita. For the next 2 to 3 years, we'll have to seriously think about buffering up our bus fleet sizes, especially in those areas. So the frequency, the routes, etc. in that particular area where I'm implementing LEZ, even though the city and the density of the buses frequency might take some time in other parts of the city, but I think the LEZ zone will have to buffer it up with the increased bus services. That goes without saying. Secondly, I think options being available from a pedestrian standpoint, options being available from cyclist standpoint, and PCMC has been at the forefront of those changes where we are providing a lot of options available for sustainable mobility. I think successively PCMC has been spending quite a lot of money in trying to create infrastructure readily available for cyclists and pedestrian to walk and to use those as last mile connectivity or as the first mile connectivity, and also coming out with the concepts of 15-minute neighborhood. We're starting with the first neighborhood very, very soon, but probably we have also thought about whether we can move with regards to that 15-minute neighborhood concept in the LEZ zone as well. So that at least for the local trips, etc., people don't necessarily have to take their vehicles. They have options available in terms of cycle or pedestrian walkways. Obviously, for larger trips or the longer trips, they will have to depend either on a newer vehicle or the public transport. So the fact that the people who can't afford a newer vehicle, to that extent, who are still from a cross section which still owns older vehicles, I think it will be very critical for us to provide that public transport last bit, so that that is there. Uh, I think those are the things that come to my mind, Ashwati.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. I mean, it's great to see the kind of actions that you plan to take as you're transitioning and creating, or looking at the next steps on low emission zones. Srikanth, sir, coming to you, sir. So in Aurangabad, what might be some of the steps that you think should be prioritized as you are looking towards implementing? You had spoken about the measures that you're taking on the electrification end. Are there other measures that you're looking at in terms of providing other sustainable mobility choices as well? And if there are some, could you highlight those?
See, we are talking about three things, three I's. Like one is incentives, which we are talking, wherein we should incentivize rather than banning. Banning is never an approach. It should be the last step which we should take after we exhaust all the opportunities which are available with us. The first thing which we are talking about is the incentive. We are providing incentives all those people who uses low emitting like uh, like least emitting pollution measures like the vehicles, be it the infrastructure, like and second is the upgradation of the infrastructure and the infrastructure to an extent which emits low carbon and all. Like we are increasing the number of city buses because this city is as of now only has 100 buses out of 17 lakh population, which is very low, and we are increasing it to 235 in this particular year only. And third thing is like widening the roads and making the pedestrians comfortable. Like the city is very poor in terms of clean access for the pedestrians and access for non-motorized transports. Those are the things. And more importantly, once we do all of this, and then by now itself we have to announce, but that announcement is due from us because that will be done only through interdepartmental coordination. Because by when we will be banning entire vehicles for a particular areas, because we are identifying with our partners uh, that which are those areas we will be declared as LEZs. And to enter LEZ, you need to have certain permissions, like only these vehicles only will enter. And the parking infrastructure will be only reserved for e-vehicles, green vehicles. Like the parking infrastructure will be reserved, like in a area where roadside parking, where this should be reserved for a green vehicles only with a green plates. And in our parking policy, we are including those things. And more importantly, whenever see we today who are using the green vehicles or low emitting vehicles, they are all well off, who takes care about the idea of clean air, clean climate and all. But the middle class thinks about the economics, because the economics is that how easy for them to switch to the green vehicles. For them, as long as we don't provide the infrastructure, if at all someone is switching to green vehicle, he will only switch when he has a ready-made infrastructure back at his home or back at his workspace. Like the autos, like autos, two-wheelers, they are not able to switch because their houses are so small. They don't have a parking space to park their business vehicles, like autos and other vehicles. If we can provide the infrastructure with charging infrastructure plus parking, definitely it will encourage them to switch, because for them, even as a rupee saved is a rupee earned for them, because that thing is there. And most importantly, idealism of clean climate and clean air, which we are educating each and every children in the schools. we are reaching out to each and every school and telling children, because now clean air is going to be the most talked about thing in the future, as we are talking about the Delhi case studies and Mumbai and many other cities are coming up, and we are not far to reach that level if we don't do all these things. So we are talking about incentives, infrastructure, and idealism, which we are propagating in our policy to the citizens.
Thank you so much, sir. I mean, it was very good the way you spoke about the kind of infrastructure that needs to be provided, the augmentation of buses, walking infrastructure, as well as the parking policy that you spoke about, and the charging infrastructure that needs to be integrated here as well. So great to hear about Aurangabad's actions on those fronts. Anumita, coming to you right now, there are these two cities that is, really looking at taking action at this particular point. But what do you think maybe the national or the state governments, what are the kind of role that they can play in order to sort of accelerate and support these cities in leaping ahead?
Right. So what we have seen from our own work, that there is an enormous governance space that is available to the state governments, and where we can certainly leverage and drive the change. But what is very challenging is that in the mobility and the transportation sector, the planning process has not yet adequately adopted all the new generation indicators and the service level benchmarks that need to govern the investment plans, tendering, and the standard operating procedures in the government. So just to give an example, that we have recently analyzed the way municipalities have spent their fund under Clean Air Action Plan. And what we have found, that even though the mandate for the fund includes public transport improvement, walking and cycling infrastructure, all of that, but in reality, the maximum expenditure is for dust control. So even when you have the money available, even when you have the mandate available, but both are not coming together to influence the spending in the transport and mobility sector. And that is largely because the approach to mobility and transport management at municipality level or at the local transport level have remained very conventional. So you and I and all the national level policies or even state level policies or clean air or climate action plans may have adopted many of these new generation strategies, but they have not got translated into the standard operating procedure and the business rules of the department. Now, unless we can bridge that gap, there, we will not be able to see this. But the funding arm, the enabling legal arm that is needed for any action, it is available. But only in the case of public transport, and it is a bit of a challenge, that there is no clear legal backup for provision of, say, for instance, transport. It is, it's a kind of a discretionary function of the departments and not a mandatory function. So a lot of these fundamental issues will have to be addressed to be able to drive the change that we are really looking for.
Thank you so much, Anumita, on sort of highlighting how, while there is the funding and legal requirements that is available to the cities, them not getting translated into the SOPs of the different departments. And Shekhar Singh, so maybe bringing you here, as the municipal commissioner, you've been leading this particular progressive measure in your city. How do you think that the different departments need to be brought together in order to successfully implement this over the next few years? What are your thoughts, sir? So we can't hear you because you're on mute.
I was saying there's no doubt about it. And as you rightly pointed out, I think the various departments, I think the major stakeholders that are there, and we've had some consultations, in fact, major consultations with the police department, the RTO, because these are the two major stakeholders as far as departments are concerned. Otherwise, all other things are largely in tune with what the municipal corporations do. But initially also, I think Srikanth sir made a point that was also the experience when we were talking to the London authority people as well, in terms of the stakeholder consultation that they had to bring in, the kind of opposition that was available, that was there in London. So it's going to be a long journey. It has to be a very long, drawn out strategy and a concerted, commitment. Even when commissioners change, because those things become very important. Srikanth sir and me, we are there now. We might, really feel upbeat about it. But once the change of guard is there, I think that sort of a commitment, that sort of a political buy-in also in terms of the local ownership by the public representatives would also become very, very important. So public representatives of the city become a very important stakeholder. I do feel that there is a increased awareness in terms of the air quality and other issues, not just in Delhi. Delhi has been, I'm natively from Delhi, so Delhi has been the torch bearer of trying to create that awareness amongst people with regards to air pollution. But I think Pune and other cities are also not far behind, Pimpri-Chinchwad or Pune or Bombay, etc. So I think there is an increased awareness. In due course of time, there will be a buy-in, very rightly pointed out again by Srikanth sir, in terms of what a luxury and how do you define luxury in coming times. And clean air is going to be one of the biggest luxury that anyone would really want to have. So I think the buy-in would increase, but still I think there is some distance to travel. But there would be about 7 to 8 stakeholders that we will need to take along. But most important, I think public representatives, RTO and police. These are the three major stakeholders apart from the municipal corporations. I think that we need to involve. We are already involving, but we need to keep involving. Apart from the business communities, the market associations, because the area that we've selected is a very high commercial zone for PCMC. And the entire RWAs, there was a slide in Ms. Chaudhary's slide with regards to senior citizens. And we really will need to take care about those needs as well. Sometimes we do try to paper over those needs. So whether it's senior citizen forums, it's resident welfare associations, or the business and market association, because market associations are the most vocal objectioners to this, because if you stop vehicles from entering a particular commercial area, that has a direct relevance to their margins, to their finances, to their economics. So I think these are the major stakeholders that we've been already dealing with, but we'll need to increasingly have a more open discussions with them and try to see how we can paper all the differences.
Thank you so much, sir.
If I can just come in here because Shekharji is here, because I think it's very important, and from what he has said, that even though there are institutional challenges, funding challenges, but there's a huge opportunity in the local innovative approaches. And in Pimpri-Chinchwad, in Pune, we have already seen a lot of good practices emerging, And that kind of brings out the importance of, one, the champion in the system, right? And second, the ability to negotiate with wide range of stakeholders if you have got the template right. So once you get the template right, and then to navigate with all to build support for it, and I think that's where the hope and the optimism is. So that's just came to me when I was listening to Shekharji.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anumita. I mean, to sort of bring together the fact that while we are making this change, it's basically, as we started, as Kashmira and Vaibhav and Siddharth mentioned about how while there's air pollution, it's so closely tied to the health of our citizens, and then bringing them into the dialogue, whether it is senior citizens or the market associations or the police or the RTO. So bringing all of them together, I think is a really nice way for us to sort of sum up how the work that we're doing are for citizens, and hence we really need to bring all of them together. And maybe the point that our Aurangabad commissioner made about clean air as the luxury for all of us, and how Shekhar Singh and you spoke about how bringing all of us together in order to ensure that all of us have clean air to breathe. Maybe at this point, it's good for us to look at if there are any questions for our panelists from our audience as well. So let me just take a look at what might be the questions. And maybe first coming to you, Siddhartha. So one of the questions that we also had is that why is there a need for a 2-year period for implementing low emission zones? And what are your thoughts of this particular timeline? And, looking at the kind of things that we've done in the past with whether it's parking management or, Anumita was talking about parking management in multiple cities, walking, cycling, everything takes a lot of time. But what are some of the thoughts in, the need for a long timeline? What are some of the milestones that we need to achieve in this journey?
Yes. Thanks, Ashwati. I think that's a very prudent question. And going ahead, we would have to answer a lot of such questions. I would like to say that LEZ is a very long-term project, which has been rightly said by Shekhar Singh sir and Shrikant sir also. And while taking into account the amount of complementary measures that the city has to do going ahead, and the amount of plans, policies, and other things that it has to resolve, the 2-year period is basically for the city to kind of understand what is the way ahead, how to make sure that the citizens know about how LEZ is going to be implemented, what is the implementation mechanism to figure out the digital and other means of enforcement that the city has to do, and also going ahead, making sure that all the departments are on board and they have a common vision towards implementing this LEZ is very important. With regards to that, there are also a few policies which the city has to take in account, like the scrappage policy or the EV policy, if it needs any revision, if it needs any more incentives to be given so that people move on to cleaner transport. So these are a few things which city still has to figure out. And that 2-year window is the window where the city can go and figure out before implementing it on ground. And people are also quite aware that what is the exact roadmap going ahead. That is why the 2-year window is what we have suggested.
Thanks, Siddharth. So the thing is, as I'm going through the question and answers session, it's wonderful to see that we have so many questions from our participants. I'm just going to open this out to Anumita, you, Vaibhav, and Siddharth as well. So we had a question from Mr. Arshal Akhtar, and he says that, for example, I mean, we're all saying that LEZs are related to reducing air pollution. Now, as we all know, the movement of air is not something that we can stop. And so his question is that how is it that, air can always come in from our neighboring areas as well? So how can LEZs actually work as a mechanism to reduce air pollution? And do we keep expanding the LEZ area to cover larger areas over time? So that is his question. And Anumita, if I could just maybe pass that on to you, what do you think about this?
I think we have been able to figure that out. So if you really look at the way the National Clean Air Program is evolving now, so which had originally started from a city-based plan. And there was a big critique that if you only do city-based plan, then there's a transboundary movement of pollution. So how can city meet clean air target if the rest of the region is polluted? So therefore, to address it now the policies have changed and they're saying you need to layer it. So you need to strengthen your local pollution, the local area, hyper-local action, then the layer of the city level action, and then the larger regional airshed level program. So in any case, it is not about either and or. It is not about one neighborhood versus another neighborhood, but it is about strengthening action that is going to impact all the neighborhoods in the region. So that's why we should have the ability, therefore, to develop this kind of a multi-tiered action plan and a multi-sector action plan, which will converge and clean up the air across the region.
Thank you so much, Anumita. And Arshal, if you had paid, if you had seen in the presentation by Vaibhav and Siddharth, when they looked at sort of mapping the emission across the different areas of the city in PCMC. In fact, the entire city of PCMC was breaching the limits. So Vaibhav, if you had some thoughts as well over there, maybe you could add your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I'll just add on to what Anumita was saying. See, we should look at low emission zones as an intermediary step. Low emission zone is not the end. European cities are now contemplating with zero emission zones. So low emission zone in a way is a starting point to achieve cleaner air. And as Shrikant sir was also saying, if it is a luxury, this luxury should not be for only one zone, right? Luxury should be available to all the citizens. So LEZ and how we are approaching it, how we have recommending for a particular zone in a city, it should be considered as a pilot, that in a particular zone, in a particular 16, 20, 25 square kilometers of area, if these are the interventions that we have to implement, this is the kind of infrastructure that would be required, and we start building on that infrastructure. If you see so far, whatever interventions have to be done, whatever preparatory stage is there, all the work has to be done by the municipalities. There's a lot of investment that would be required. There's a lot of convincing that would be required. A lot of work has to be done. Once we are through that, then we move on to the next stage, geographically also, and intensity of the intervention also. Yeah.
So there's also another question, and thank you so much, Vaibhav, for your response. So Chetan asks us, how many of the national or state initiatives have been deployed for or in favor of low emission zones and clean air? And does it include a dedicated fund for capacity building or awareness of the officials? And do you think that that would improve the operations of such plans? Vaibhav or Anumita, I mean, I think he's referring to the various clean air national and state initiatives that are already existing. Do you have any thoughts on that front?
So is it about that the kind of fund and plans that are available to fund LEZ, if I got your question right?
Question, I think, is also about the whole the lack of awareness. So right now we have Shekhar Singh sir, Shrikant sir, who are sort of champions, who are aware of this particular piece of work, who are really championing it in their own cities and convincing multiple stakeholders. But in other cities, there's also a need for capacity building of not only the highest decision makers, but also the staff, below and within as well. So is there a fund within these national initiatives for capacity building and awareness of the officials is the question. And also whether we think that on the need for such sort of a capacity building in order to improve the operations of these plants.
Okay, got it. So yes, so what is, so normally most of these funds that are getting created now, whether that's the Clean Air Fund or the Swachh Bharat Selection Fund, they all have a component of capacity building. And there is a dedicated component within the larger fund that is available for training and capacity building of the implementing agencies and the staff. So it is, so there is a provision for that. But all I would like to add is that it is important to combine awareness building and capacity building with a very clear mandate of what needs to be done. Capacity building in isolation of a mandate does not really deliver on the intended objective.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I really feel that I always sort of joke that if you learned Excel but never actually ever opened Excel, you would forget about everything that you had learned. And so similarly, any capacity building, when that is integrated with actual implementation, such that the inspiration from the capacity building can move into the action component of it, that would be extremely useful. So just as we are going to wrap up right now, I'm just going to take one last comment from each of you. And if I could bring you, Shekhar Singh sir, for just maybe one comment, what is your vision as you close this particular webinar on low emission zones? What would be that one action that you'd really like to see in the city of PCMC as the next step?
Ashwati, for me, as I also began with, the one action that I'd really like to do is get on with my GRAP plan. I think that to me is a precursor of what I can do in LEZ. If we are able to convince the larger people, the larger populace of PCMC with regards to the importance of GRAP, with regards to the other things, I think we would have created a ground good enough, and that would really start propelling us towards a day where we can actually start implementing LEZ. But there are multiple things that the cities need to do. The more we do, the lesser we are able to do is something sometimes I feel. And it's not just LEZ, it has to be on multiple levels, on multiple platforms that we need to fight this battle. But I think GRAP to me is the first standpoint that I'm looking for as far as PCMC is concerned.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much for making time, for this particular webinar. Anumita, coming to you, sir, spoke about so many things that our cities need to do. What do you think is that one action that you would like our cities to take?
Actually, it is so tough to say this one action, but I'll just say overall, it is time not for pessimism, but for optimism. Despite the challenges and the complexity, I think that still the changes that we are seeing in our cities gives you the confidence that it is possible to make the change happen. But we know, my ultimate point is that we know all the technical solution, we know the science behind it, we can even figure out the resources and the funding for it. But I think what will really drive the real change is when the sustainability will be seen not as something to save the planet, but a cool thing to do. I think that's the excitement that we need to build to be able to drive the change in our cities.
Sounds great. Let's make change happen and let that be cool. So that's what you're saying. Vaibhav, let me hear from you. What is that one thing that, you as someone who's been working on this field, what is that one thing, maybe even the next action step that you'd really like our cities to take?
Yeah, sure. I think collaboration is something that I'll look forward to. As Shekhar Singh sir was also saying, that every time you try to do something, there are so many other things that pile up. There's so much complexity in any urban intervention, especially in this. And as Siddharth was presenting the last slide that we had, there are so many answers that there are so many questions that are still unanswered. At the very immediate one being, how do you enforce? This was one of the questions that was coming up again and again. How do we identify the polluting vehicles and restrict? So there are so many layers to this conversation. I was looking at the chat also at the questions. There are so many climate related factors, air dispersion, everything. Economics is there, health is there. So we need to bring all stakeholders on the table. I heard Shrikant sir also mentioning that the one thing that Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar doing right now is trying to convince all the departments to implement this thing. And that is, for me, I think the most important next step, bringing everyone together on one page. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav. Collaboration from you. So Siddharth, last point, what are your thoughts?
I think there are a lot of complementary functions that the LEZ need that have been already adopted by a lot of cities, be it walking, cycling master plans, or even parking policies. I would really like to see these complementary measures being run-of-the-mill affair and not something that we need to struggle for going ahead, so that LEZ as a concept will be more sustainable and going ahead, the implementation would be more seamless.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. So let's make cool things happen. Let's start from ground zero. For PCMC, it was GRAP. Let's do it with collaboration. And let's make sure that complementary actions are no longer something that we need to be talking about, but just run-of-the-mill actions. With that, I think we'd like to really wrap up this panel discussion and pass it over to Kashmira back. And also to all the others who've asked questions, we will definitely be answering your questions and we will send them your answers via email. So Kashmira, over to you. And thank you, panelists, for this wonderful discussion.
Thanks, Ashwati. Yes, thank you so much, panelists, for this very informative conversation. And we wish our cities best of luck and success with the implementation of low emission zones. And thank you so much, Ashwati, for moderating a very informative panel discussion. Now, at the beginning of the webinar, we had conducted a poll asking what is the first thing that you would do if your city's air quality improved by 50% overnight. So miracles do happen. I believe in miracles. And the majority of you said that you'd open all windows and take a deep, blissful breath. So here's to hoping that clean air is not a luxury, it becomes a norm. And within the next decade, all of us can open our windows, breathe in that air, and thanks to low emission zones inspired by city leaders championing this cause. So with that, we come to a conclusion of the first episode of our Urbanlogue 4.0. Thank you, all of you, for attending the session, and a special thank you to Urban Research Foundation for supporting to make LEZ a reality in Chhatrapati, Sambhajinagar. And the next LEZ webinar series will dive deeper on the implementation related aspects such as enforcement, legal aspects, and air quality monitoring methodologies. We will have more experts and decision makers as part of that webinar as well. So stay tuned, keep an eye out on our social media platform for the upcoming webinar. And we will also share a video recording with you all after this webinar. And to close off with, a special thank you to ICCT for working alongside us over the past years. It's been a great experience. So I hope you all have had a very informative, educative session. And with that, have a great evening. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.